the best love story of all time and the greatest classical work ever written. The stories of David Lean and Noel Coward's 1945 film Brief Encounter and Sergei Rachmaninov's 1901 Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor are forever intertwined in the hearts and minds of British audiences. While many films have their own scores specially written or draw from a large volume of contemporary and classical music, the entire score of Brief Encounter is, with very minor diegetic exceptions, completely made up of excerpts from Rachmaninoff's Concerto, known in the classical music world simply as Rock 2. A typical performance of the concerto runs about 35 minutes, less than half the length of Brief Encounter. The fact that it is capable of being a great score for the film is a testament to the emotional and musical range of the concerto, as well as the scoring decisions of Lean and his team. Throughout this, we're going to talk a little bit about the concerto and the choice of excerpts, showing how the film uses the music to strengthen the story. Let's start at the beginning of the film. Watch a minute or so straight from the top. Bars of piano chords, which serve to build tension before we get to this real beginning here at rehearsal 1. So here the violas take the main melody, a dark and melancholy theme that really seems strange to start the best love story of all time. So let's analyze, starting with these first 4 bars. So this is what many would call the main theme of this piano concerto. It's an example of a musical motif, a short, usually repeated musical idea. There's a lot of motion here, but there's also the sense that we're not going anywhere. In fact, if we remove the quarter notes and simplify the line, we get this. Right, this sort of motion here, it's not exactly the most exciting thing you've ever done. You hover around middle C for a while before making a beeline down to G. Just from the first 4 bars, this melodic line feels stuck where it is, declining without a chance to escape, just as Celia Johnson's character Laura feels at the beginning of the film. Moving on, these next 4 bars have a little more motion to them. We still don't get the sense that we're going anywhere, especially when the next 4 are a note-for-note copy of the first 4. Finally, in the last 4 bars, we soar. But look where we end. Right back here on middle C. Throughout the beginning phrase, we have this constant motion and flux, even if by the end we didn't really go anywhere. This is representative of the plot of the film, as Laura goes on adventures with her lover, Trevor Howard's Alec Harvey, only to end up with her husband Fred as if nothing happened. Yet throughout these 16 bars, the piano and the basses are aggressively reminding us of this dour D minor tonality. The melody is powerful and grim, even if it doesn't really go anywhere. I mentioned before that these first 4 bars are a type of musical motif. We actually have a really special kind of motif here called a Leitmotif, a term coined by Richard Wagner while talking about his operas. A leitmotif is essentially a musical theme that's associated with a person, emotion, or other thing that appears throughout the work, whether that's an opera or a film Debussy and Stravinsky both used these, and they referred to them as their calling cards. To see the leitmotif in action, let's go to the next place where our motive turns up, about halfway through the film, while Laura starts lying to her friend. Here, the leitmotif reappears almost exactly, but there's a couple things to notice. First of all, this recording of Rock 2, more than any other I've ever heard, emphasizes this harmony up a major third, this one. So the thirds harmony, together with some of the lower voices, create two chords in particular, C dominant 7, and G half diminished. Now, these two chords don't fit into the C minor tonality that we've gotten used to. They do, however, fit into this key of F minor. So you can make a good argument, and actually I would make the argument that we've modulated into F minor based solely on what these upper voices are doing. However, with that argument, the cello and basses kind of ruin the party because they are down playing this bass line, which is very obviously still in C and does not fit into F at all. So without a clear key, our ears aren't sure how to contextualize the music we hear, and we're uneasy, like the ground is kind of shifting beneath our feet. This is exactly what David Lean wants. Laura is expanding her lie to more and more people, going to greater and greater lengths to deceive her husband and keep her affair a secret. In the coming scenes, she'll start to descend into paranoia, becoming convinced that she's about to be found out. Our discomfort in the music plays into our and Laura's discomfort with her affair. But just as the original leitmotif signaled the beginning of both the film and the concerto, this passage signals the beginning too, the beginning of Laura and Alex's affair falling apart. Also in this same passage, we have this line taken up by the woodwinds. This is what we call a counter melody, another melodic line taking place at the same time as our main melody and providing contrasting harmonies and feelings. In this case, there's a lot of movement, a lot of motion, a lot of change. Laura's life is very much in flux here, and it's not totally comfortable. Again, we're playing with this C7 chord, this one right here, which does not totally fit into the key of C minor, but also doesn't really fit anywhere else. This is just like Laura, who's not fitting in. She knows she has no good options, nowhere she can really feel secure, just like our ears have nowhere that we can feel at home. The next leitmotif we hear comes as Laura sits on the train, tuning out her acquaintance Dolly, played by Everly Gregg. Let's watch.
My dear, I've always had a passion for doctors. I can well understand how it is that women get neurotic. Of course, some of them go too.
Wish I could trust you. I wish you were a wise, kind friend. Instead of a gossiping acquaintance I've known casually for years and never particularly cared for. I wish.
Fancy him going all the way to Africa.
As Dolly keeps talking, her voice fades away, replaced by Laura's voiceover, and the concerto starting at rehearsal 13. The solo French horn, accompanied by chords in the strings and winds, plays a delicate melody in the key of A-flat major. We follow the same pattern about a minute later.
She got some awful kind of germ through going out on a picnic, and she was ill for months and months.
I wish you'd stop talking. I wish you'd stop prying and trying to find things out. I wish you were dead. No, I don't mean that. That was silly and unkind. But I wish you'd stop talking.
My dear, all her hair came out, and she said the social life was quite horrid. Provincial, you know, and very nouveau.
This ascending musical line serves to represent an escape for Laura, a sort of flying away from her problems as she tunes out Dolly. Then we have this slow descent back to earth. Now, this is the first time we've heard music in a major key, but it's not happy or jolly. It's really more wistful. Again, we're off to a pretty somber start for a love movie. But the next time this escape motif appears is at timestamp 55:02, as Laura sits awake in bed watching her husband fall asleep in the bed beside hers.
That week was misery. I went through it in a sort of trance. How odd of you not to have noticed that you were living with a stranger in the house. Thursday came at last. I'd arranged to meet Elliott outside the hospital at 12:30.
Hello.
Hello.
As Laura says, that week was misery. I went through it in a sort of trance. The ascending line plays. And we're reminded of the trance that Laura went into on the train, tuning Dolly out. But while the last two snippets ended after 12 bars, here we go all the way to rehearsal 14. Down-to-earth part of the motif, suggesting that this scene, as Laura spends time with Alex, is the true reality, what the world should be. This is where she's happy, this is where she wants to be, and the music reflects that. Then we have the horns swelling, just as Laura's emotions do, and we have this ascending A-flat major scale. We actually do get the resolution of this scale here. But it's not a strong, powerful ending. The film backs off, and once again we see a pattern of brighter passages in major being delicate, in this case reminding us of the tenuous position of this affair, knowing that the brief encounter cannot last. Let's discuss another musical passage that's a little too long to be a motif, but nevertheless also signals a sort of lift away from the real world. Let's watch.
Thanks, darling. This can't last. This misery can't last. I must remember that and try to control myself. Nothing lasts, really. Neither happiness nor despair. Not even life lasts very long. There'll come a time in the future when I shan't mind about this anymore. When I can look back and say quite peacefully and cheerfully how silly I was. No, I don't want that time to come ever. I want to remember every minute. Always. Always to the end of my days.
Catch what?
Wake up, Laura. We're here.
We start here at rehearsal 27, and we go almost to the end of movement 2. This is probably the most dramatic thing we've heard so far. We have these spectacular chords dominating in E major. And it goes on like that. We also have the piano playing this quintuplet figure that I will now attempt. It goes on like this. creating what Gary Woodrow Cobb in his master's thesis called suggestive of gentle undulations. This is actually a really good descriptor for what's going on. I'm not doing it justice on this piano for sure, but what we get is this movement up and down and up and down that's matched in the woodwinds playing these arpeggios going up and down and up and down. These represent the waves of emotion that Laura is feeling in this scene. The magnificent quality, I mean, we can tell, even though it's muted, that the orchestra's playing loudly, doesn't really seem to match the despair that Laura feels in this scene. Rather, it matches what Laura is thinking and feeling about, what could have been with Alec. But at the end of the musical excerpt, we stop a few measures short. The last few notes we hear from the orchestra are we can tell where this wants to resolve to an E major chord. We want. In fact, that happens in the concerto in one of the most gorgeous endings to a movement I've ever heard. But in the film, the orchestra fades out before we can get that resolution. Instead, this is the last thing we hear before the screeching of the train interrupts Laura's thoughts and the harsh light of day floods her face. Laura has to return to the real world, as Dolly reminds her. Wake up, Laura, we're here. Really on the nose. This lack of resolution is a representation of the lack of resolution that Laura feels. She's thinking about Alec. She's thinking about what could have been. And it never goes anywhere. Of course, 10 minutes into the film, we don't know that yet, but it's still a representation of something unfinished, something that we're longing for that we don't get. We hear this section one more time, and it's a part of something a little more drawn out towards the end. Let's watch the relevant part. I'll give some of the build-up, and then you'll see a signal when the music arrives at rehearsal 27.
Please don't. I'll come over with you to your platform. I'd rather.
Very well.
Do you think we shall ever see each other again?
I don't know. Not for years, anyway.
The children will all be grown up. I wonder if they'll ever meet and know each other.
Couldn't I write you just once in a while?
No, Alec, please, you know we promised.
Laura, dear. I do love you so very much. I love you with all my heart and soul.
I want to die. If only I could die.
If you died, you'd forget me. I want to be remembered.
Yes, I know I do too.
We've still got a few minutes.
Laura, what a lovely surprise. My dear, I've been...
So we have this beautiful, emotional, muted passage playing as Laura looks on dejectedly. I mean, just listen to this. Rachmaninoff is really tugging at the heartstrings here. And then we hit rehearsal 27 exactly as Alec tells Laura, I love you. This feeds into that glorious, happy, beautiful feeling that we get with the E major chords. And then Laura goes and says, I want to die. I mean, it's all very romantic, of course, but it's not exactly happy. So we can help contextualize what's going on here by focusing on this wistful violin melody. this palpable happiness of what was, and a feeling of what could have been between Alec and Laura. But at the same time, we're feeling this somber reminder that the real world awaits. All of these emotions are captured so well by this gorgeous melody. And then once again, at the end of the excerpt, we have with the resolution replaced by Dolly. Dolly again serves as the reminder of the real world, Laura's social life, her marital obligations that deny her the resolution she would like from this affair with Alec. Once again, we see how the score, the lack of that resolution, plays into our emotions and perfectly capturing and heightening what Lean and Coward want us to feel. There's one last motif I want to mention. We hear it first about 30 minutes into the film, as Laura and Alec are having lunch.
What made you say that?
I don't know. Yes, I do.
Tell me.
No, I couldn't really. You were saying about the coal mines.
Oh, yes. The inhalation of coal dust. That's one specific form of the diseases. It's called anthracosis.
What are the others?
Chalicosis. That comes from metal dust. Steelworks, you know.
Yes, of course, steelworks.
And silicosis. That's stone dust. Gold mines.
I see. There's your train.
Yeah.
Here, it's a simple melody. It's not exactly joyful, but it's sweet. While before we've had a heavily involved orchestra, it's just solo piano here. The score doesn't impose, and it provides a lighthearted atmosphere for the lunch. Once again, there's a seeming incongruity. Alec is talking about lung diseases, not exactly cute date talk. But Laura's engaged. She's just enjoying spending time with Alec. And so what the music is telling us is that it doesn't really matter. Laura's having a good time, and this leitmotif is Laura's happy place. This melody is the main melodic idea of the third movement, and it appears multiple times throughout this concerto. But in the film, the next time we hear it is at the end. Let's
Never
listen.
again. Not to be unhappy anymore. I turned and went back into the refreshment room. That's when I nearly fainted.
Let's stop there. This is not exactly the same sort of idea. Here, the exact same melody is heavily orchestral. We know that Laura is still thinking of Alec, maybe even thinking back to that same lunch date. But the music is much more somber and wistful, reminding us that the moment has passed. It continues as we jump cut to Laura inside her house, showing that she's been thinking of Alec and her happy place the whole time. We see a physical separation in the scene between Laura and her husband, a reminder of the distance placed between them by Alec. The music is constantly reminding us of what was and what could have been, and the times that Laura was happy. Let's continue watching to the end.
Yes, dear.
Whatever your dream was, it wasn't a very happy one, was it?
No.
Is there anything I can do to help?
Yes, Fred, you always help.
You've been a long
So we've got this sort of movement going on here, but it's not really connected to the
Thank you
motif.
for coming back to me.
And then suddenly, the music cuts to the maestoso right after rehearsal 38. And we have this same happy place motif. But right here at the end of the film is the only departure from the score of Rock 2. That C major chord. In the concerto, you know, the music goes on for a little while. Anyway, the music goes on in the concerto. It flourishes and dances around for a minute or two before it concludes. Here, though, we end. And we end with the only time that a happy major passage has been allowed to be noisy. In fact, we end with what is known as a picardy third. Which is a major one chord at the end of a minor piece of music. The picardy third is known to be sappy and gushy and mushy, to the point where music people regularly make memes about it. And this meme is right. From a music standpoint, the picardy third is totally functionally unnecessary. But here it gives a powerful message. For the first time, we have a loud resolution. We have a strong, positive emotion being expressed through the score. Right after the happy place leitmotif. The major chord tells us everything is going to be okay. Everything is happy. The motif suggests that Laura is once again right back in her happy place, but this time with Frank, her husband. This is important because without it, the ending is somewhat ambiguous. Frank embraces her, but we don't know. Does she know about the affair? What's going to happen next? We have all these questions, but it doesn't matter. What matters is she came back, and we're happy, and everything is going to be okay. Because in the end, Laura's happy place is right at home with her husband and kids where it was all along. This resolution is the magic of Brief Encounter's score. Through the repeated motifs, through the dancing around, and through the final conclusion, the music adds to the story, feeding not only our emotions, but our insight as well. The score of Brief Encounter is pretty unique as far as film scores go. Using a piano concerto, a 35-minute piano concerto, as the only source for an entire 90-minute feature-length film was a bold choice on the part of the directors. But ultimately, Rock 2 delivers. Using Wagnerian strategies like the leitmotif, Lean and Coward are able to use the score to evoke recurring themes and emotions, and they combine this with Rachmaninoff's more standard musical techniques like the picardy third, like the ambiguous tonalities, like these melodic contours, to add to the emotional power of the film. Both Brief Encounter and Rock 2, helped by each other's popularity, have survived as classics throughout the decades. And it's not hard to see why.